In a small apartment in suburban Boston, Allison Burton stared out the window as she split a pill in half, making it small enough for her son Noah to swallow. The early November morning was cold, with gray clouds hanging low. Though fatigue showed in her eyes after finishing her night shift at the hospital, there was an unwavering strength behind them that would never fade. "Mom, we're practicing for the Thanksgiving play at school today," Noah said as he scooped up his breakfast cereal. His small face was pale, but his eyes were full of curiosity and intelligence. Allison placed the medicine in front of her son and smiled gently. "That's nice. Have you memorized all your lines?" "Yes. I'm playing a pilgrim, so I don't have many lines." Noah swallowed the pill with a glass of water. His thin fingers trembled slightly. "My teacher said I could take a break if I get tired." Allison gently stroked her son's hair. Diagnosed with end-stage kidney disease at 8, he had already developed the patience of an adult. Medically, he had been given 6 months to a year, but Allison refused to accept that. "Noah, you're going to make a wonderful pilgrim," she said as she adjusted the collar of his thin sweater. "I'll ask Ms. Maggie to show me today." After Noah left for school, Allison sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee and opening a letter that had arrived the night before. Her eyes fell on the text printed on fine paper: "Dear Allison and Noah, please join us for Thanksgiving dinner. From 4 o'clock. Dress code is formal. Awaiting your response." Allison sighed. It was an invitation from her mother, Carol. A wealthy real estate broker, she lived in a mansion in suburban Boston and valued her reputation in high society above all else. Her father, Jonathan, had passed away 10 years ago, and since then, her relationship with her mother had grown even colder. The phone rang, with Brenda displayed on the screen. Allison hesitated before answering. "Did you get the invitation?" Her sister's voice was haughty as usual. Mom's pushing for a response. She's invited special guests this year, so she's in a hurry for replies. Allison closed her eyes. Her sister Brenda had married Richard Weston, a famous kidney specialist, and lived in an upscale neighborhood in Newton. They had no children, which was Brenda's secret sorrow. "Noah isn't doing very well. I don't know if he'll make it to Thanksgiving." "That story again." Brenda's voice had a cutting edge. "It's your own fault you chose to be a single mother. Mom says you have no idea how difficult it is for her to explain Noah's illness to everyone." Allison listened in silence. At family gatherings, she and Noah were always treated like outsiders. For her mother and sister, the fact that she had a child out of wedlock, and moreover, that the child was considered defective, was an embarrassment in their social circle. "Has Richard said anything?" Allison quietly asked. Her brother-in-law was renowned as a kidney specialist, but he had never offered to consult on his nephew's case. "He's busy. Besides, he's made a decision not to mix private and business matters." After the call ended, Allison stood by the window, gazing into the distance.
Can you imagine making $10,000 a month just from YouTube, all from home? That's exactly what I did with Reddit Stories. No face, no voice. Check the link in the description if you're curious.
Across the street, neighborhood children were playing, jumping into piles of fallen autumn leaves. She wished Noah could play there too. Looking at the calendar, she saw that Noah's next test results would come in a week before Thanksgiving. Actually, there had been slight signs of stability in his condition recently. Perhaps the new combination of medications was working. But she didn't feel like sharing this glimmer of hope with her family. They wouldn't understand. Allison picked up the invitation and wrote, "Will attend," on the response card. For Noah's sake, she wanted to create one more opportunity to mend relationships with her family. Perhaps this time, her mother and Brenda might open their hearts a little. Looking up at a photograph hanging on the apartment wall, she saw Noah's smile from when he was healthy. Allison silently vowed, "No matter what, I will protect you." After finishing her coffee, she began changing into her hospital uniform. On Thanksgiving Day, Allison felt anxious as she adjusted the collar of Noah's small suit. From the car window, her mother Carol's mansion came into view. The classic white colonial-style house, surrounded by manicured gardens and a stone-paved driveway, symbolized wealth and status in Boston's suburbs. "Mom, Grandma's house is so big," Noah said, looking out the window. Thanks to his medication, his complexion was a bit better today. "Are Uncle and Aunt coming too?" "Yes, they are," Allison answered with a smile, though her eyes couldn't hide her tension. "Be nice to everyone today, especially Grandma." As the taxi stopped, the front door opened, and Carol appeared, dressed in an emerald green dress with a pearl necklace. "Allison, Noah, glad you could come," Carol's voice sounded warm, but her eyes quickly assessed Noah's thin body. "Noah, how about a kiss for Grandma?" Noah politely kissed her cheek. Carol lightly patted his head, then quickly withdrew her hand, as if his illness might be contagious. "Brenda and Richard are already here. Richard said he'd take a look at your son," Carol said as she led them to the living room. Unofficially, of course. Allison caught her breath. Richard had agreed to examine Noah. And she felt a bitter irony in her mother referring to Noah as your son, as if he weren't part of this family. In the living room, Brenda and Richard were seated on the sofa. Brenda wore a designer dress with a perfect blonde hairstyle. Richard merely nodded slightly, his eyes fixed on the whiskey glass in his hand. "Is this Noah?" Brenda stood up and looked her nephew up and down. "He's thinner than before. Are you eating properly?" "Yes, I am," Noah answered in a small voice. Richard finally looked up. Behind his glasses, his eyes had the cool, analytical gaze of a physician. "What are his recent kidney function values?" Those were his first words. "Last week's creatinine was 2.8, Allison answered. Richard frowned. "Not as good as I'd hoped." Brenda grabbed Allison's arm and pulled her into the kitchen. "You're lucky Richard's willing to examine him. There's a years-long waiting list for the clinical trials he's involved with," she lowered her voice. "But he can't give special treatment to people in your situation." "What do you mean?" Allison demanded. "Well, being a single mother and financially." Brenda hesitated. "The trial medications are very expensive. And naturally, cases with better prospects get priority." Carol entered the kitchen. "Let's chat a bit before dinner." Noah is in the living room with Richard. Led by the two women, Allison walked down the hallway to the dining room. Family photographs adorned the walls, but none of Allison and Noah. "How's it going? Your job at the hospital?" Carol asked. "Good, I was promoted last month to head nurse in pediatrics," Allison answered with a touch of pride. "A nurse?" Carol sighed elegantly. "You had so much more potential. You should have gone to medical school." Brenda nodded in agreement. "You could have attended the same university as Richard. Many of his colleagues are single." During dinner preparations, Allison excused herself to use the restroom. On her way back, she passed her father's study. The door was slightly ajar, and out of nostalgia, she went in. After her father's death, this room had been preserved as a memorial room by her mother. As she looked up at her father's photograph on the wall, she noticed a stack of documents on the desk. Approaching casually, she saw an envelope marked "Management of Jonathan Hartwell's estate." Impulsively, she peeked inside. There were documents showing that her father had established a trust fund for her and Noah. A considerable amount had been specifically set aside for Noah's medical care and education. But these funds had never reached her. The documents were dated shortly after her father's death. Allison's hand trembled. Her mother had concealed this fact for 10 years. Noah might have had more treatment options. He might have had access to the latest experimental treatments. "What are you doing?" Turning around, she saw Carol standing in the doorway. Her eyes were cold, and for a moment, showed a flash of fear. "Just looking at Dad's photo," Allison answered calmly, quietly returning the documents to their place. This was a time to stay composed for Noah's sake. "I was feeling nostalgic." Carol seemed somewhat relieved. "Dinner is ready. Everyone's waiting." As she headed to the dining room, Allison's mind was in turmoil. She found Noah and squeezed his small hand tightly. Richard was saying something to Noah, but she couldn't hear it. The family gathered around the lavish dining table as Carol signaled for everyone to be seated. A huge turkey sat in the center of the table, and the room sparkled with light from an expensive chandelier. Paintings with autumn colors appropriate for Thanksgiving adorned the walls. "How fortunate that we can all gather for Thanksgiving this year," Carol smiled. "I'm especially glad that Noah could join us." Allison shuddered at the hidden meaning behind those words. She kept the discovery about her father's estate to herself, determined to get through this night for her son's sake. The tension in the family heightened as they sat before the turkey. The light from the crystal chandelier illuminated the silver cutlery, and wine glasses made elegant sounds with each toast. Traditional Thanksgiving dishes were arranged on the sideboard: mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, green bean casserole, and pumpkin pie. Everything was laid out perfectly, as if straight out of a gourmet food magazine. "Everyone, please be seated," said Carol, directing guests to their designated places. Allison sat next to Noah, discreetly checking his pulse. Her son's condition seemed stable for now. Carol looked at Allison and frowned slightly. "You've worn that dress before, haven't you?" Allison looked down at her deep red dress. True, she had worn it several times, but on her salary, she couldn't afford many dresses. "Yes, I like it," she answered quietly. Brenda laughed. "I have so many clothes I can't decide what to wear." She moved her arm as if to show off the sleeves of her Dior dress. "Richard bought it for me last month to celebrate saving a special patient." Richard remained silent, staring at the wine in his glass, his profile stern, with occasional furrowing of his brow. "Now, words of thanks before our meal," Carol said. "This year, let's be especially grateful for what we have. To be healthy, successful." Her gaze quickly passed over Noah, and for family. After a brief prayer, Carol stood up and took the knife and fork to carve the turkey. "This one is special this year. Organic, from a special farm." "As expected, Mother," Brenda said. "You always find the best." Carol began carving the turkey. The tension in the room was all too familiar to Allison, reminding her of many meals spent in this house, especially the cold silence when she announced her pregnancy. "I read an interesting statistic recently," Carol said as she skillfully manipulated the knife. "About rising medical costs. Especially the enormous expenses for terminal patients." Allison's body stiffened. She looked toward her son. Noah seemed to be looking forward to eating the turkey, unaware of the conversation's intent. Carol continued, "Have you ever thought about what a burden it is for the family?" Her knife separated the turkey's leg. "Financially, emotionally." "Mother," Allison warned in a low voice. But Carol didn't stop. As she carved the turkey breast, she suddenly said, "End-stage kidney disease at 8. Well, the burden will be lighter soon." "Ha!" Allison felt the blood drain from her face. The air in the room seemed to freeze. But then, unexpectedly, her mother's friends and relatives seated at the far end of the table began to chuckle. "Carol, you're always so honest," her mother's old friend Deborah said. "But it's true, isn't it? The medical costs alone are overwhelming." Noah stared at his plate on the table. All expression had vanished from his small face. As Allison was about to stand up, trembling with anger, Brenda intervened. She walked over to her nephew's seat, and stroking Noah's black hair, smiled with ice-cold politeness. 6 months left, right? Enjoy your last turkey." Again, laughter erupted, as if watching a cruel comedy. The laughter spread throughout the room, echoing off the walls. Allison froze. Her eyes witnessed an unbelievable scene. Her family was laughing in front of a dying child. Amid the laughter, she felt Noah's small body trembling. At the end of the table, Richard showed an uncomfortable expression. He looked at his wife and shook his head slightly but didn't raise his voice. As a doctor, or perhaps as a human being, something seemed to be conflicting within him. Yet, he maintained his silence. The sound of blood pounding in Allison's ears intensified. The discovery about her father's estate, and now these cruel words, it broke something inside her. She slowly put down her fork. The sound resonated unnaturally loudly in the room. "Noah, we're leaving." Her voice was quiet, but her words had a steel-like strength. Carol frowned. "Allison, it's a joke. You're being dramatic, as usual." "Noah, put on your coat." Allison stood up and took her son's hand. Brenda laughed. "See, she's getting emotional again. That's why we worry. Are you really okay on your own?" Allison stood up with her son. Her eyes captured Carol's. "We need to discuss Dad's estate. I'll contact you later." The color drained from Carol's face. "What are you talking about?" "Noah is my priority right now," Allison coldly replied. She held her son's hand and left the dining room. She heard confused voices and some mockery from behind, but Allison didn't look back. On the way to the entrance, she took out her smartphone to confirm the taxi she had called in advance. Outside, the cold night air enveloped them. On Thanksgiving night, many homes were continuing their warm family gatherings. "Mom, why was everyone laughing?" Noah asked in a small voice. Tears glistened in his eyes. Allison embraced her son. "They don't know the truth, Noah. Am I really going to die?" That question tore at her heart. The taxi arrived, and they slid into the back seat. Through the window, the lights of Carol's house receded in the distance. "I'll tell you when we get home," Allison squeezed Noah's hand. "But for now, there's something I want you to know. Mom will never, ever give up on you. Understand?" Noah nodded quietly. His eyes, full of trust, shone clearly even in the dark car. The taxi continued to drive quietly, and Allison clutched a piece of paper she had taken from her mother's house. It was a copy of her father's will, which she had slipped into her wallet. In her heart, something was turning into determination. "Mom, I'm hungry," Noah said in a small voice. Allison smiled. "When we get home, I'll make a special dinner. Our own Thanksgiving." Back at the apartment, Allison prepared a small Thanksgiving dinner for Noah as promised. Turkey slices from the freezer, instant mashed potatoes, and cranberry sauce heated in the microwave. Not luxurious, but enough for the two of them to share. After Noah fell asleep, Allison spread out the copy of her father's will on the kitchen table, and again tears streamed down her cheeks. Taking a sip of single malt whiskey, she tried to organize her thoughts. The fact that assets had been hidden from her and Noah for so long, combined with tonight's events, stirred mixed emotions of anger and sadness. Allison lined up Noah's medications on the counter. The bottles of colorful pills gleamed inorganically under the kitchen's fluorescent light. She mechanically sorted the pills, checking the morning, noon, and evening medication schedules. This had been her daily routine for 3 years. But tonight, her mind was in chaos. "Mom." Turning around, she saw Noah standing in the hallway in his pajamas. His small figure was half hidden in the shadow of the door. "Noah, what is it?" "Can't sleep." Allison hurriedly wiped away her tears. Noah slowly approached the table. "Am I really going to die?" He repeated the question from earlier. His eyes looked at his mother with an adult-like seriousness. Allison took a deep breath. She struggled between Noah's right to know and her desire to protect him. Then she decided. He deserved the truth. Sit down, Noah, she pointed to a chair at the table. I have something to tell you. Noah sat quietly, waiting for his mother's words. Actually, 3 weeks ago, your tests showed a slight improvement in your kidney function, Allison said quietly. The new combination of medications seems to be working. Noah's eyes widened. Does that mean I'm getting better? You're not completely better yet, Allison chose her words carefully. But you're better than before. The doctors were a bit surprised too. Then why did Grandma and Aunt? I didn't tell them, Allison gently held her son's hand. I didn't want to tell anyone until I was sure your condition was stabilizing. Especially not them. Noah thought quietly. They really don't like me, do they? Allison hugged her son tightly. They're complicated people. But we don't need them. We're strong together. That night, after putting Noah to bed again, Allison wrote an email to contact a lawyer about the contents of her father's will. From tomorrow, she intended to fight for her and her son's rights. Morning light streamed through the window, announcing the start of a new day. Allison made coffee and gazed out the window. The day after Thanksgiving, many people were heading out for Black Friday shopping. She had taken time off and planned to spend the day with Noah. Suddenly, the phone rang. It was from an unknown number. Hello, this is Allison Burton. Allison, it's Richard. Surprised by the unexpected voice, she was startled. Can we talk? Richard's voice had a tension she had never heard before. Yes, of course, she answered. About last night. I want to apologize, Richard said. The family's attitude was unacceptable as a doctor and as a human being. Allison listened silently. I should have objected at the time, his voice was tinged with regret. But after last night, I had a big argument with Brenda. I couldn't tolerate her behavior. I understand, Allison responded calmly. But why are you calling now? It's about Noah, Richard's voice returned to a professional tone. The creatinine value you mentioned, could I see his recent test results? Allison bit her lip. Why? You haven't cooperated until now. To be honest, Richard hesitated. There's a clinical trial I'm involved with. It's a combination of a new immunosuppressant and kidney function regeneration therapy. After last night, I reviewed Noah's case again. I think he might be a candidate. Allison's heart raced. Really? I can't promise anything, Richard said cautiously. But if you let me see the latest test results, I can evaluate. 2 hours later, Richard was in Allison's apartment living room. He came in casual clothes, not his usual suit. Noah was watching TV in the living room. Richard carefully examined Noah's latest test results. His eyebrows raised. This is unexpected, he said as he turned the pages. Kidney function has been gradually improving over the past 3 weeks. Small changes, but a definite trend is visible. Yes, Allison said. But the doctors weren't optimistic. They said it might be a temporary improvement. Richard shook his head. That might be the case. But this combination of drugs, your attending physician is taking quite an advanced approach. He stood up and looked toward Noah. May I talk to him a bit? As a doctor this time. Allison nodded. Richard sat next to Noah and, for the first time, seriously engaged with his nephew. He asked about Noah's symptoms kindly but professionally. Allison watched the two from a distance. After the examination and questions, Richard turned back to Allison. My clinical trial begins a new phase in 6 weeks. I want to do everything I can to make sure Noah can participate. Why? Allison asked directly. Why have you suddenly become cooperative? Richard took a deep breath. Last night, I broke my oath as a doctor. I saw a suffering child before me and did nothing. Deep regret showed in his eyes. And when I argued with Brenda after returning home, it made me think a lot about myself and our relationship. Over the next few weeks, Richard became actively involved in Noah's treatment. He fully utilized his expertise to provide Allison with information about the latest treatments. He was doing this without Brenda's knowledge. Meanwhile, the relationship between Brenda and Richard deteriorated further. She strongly objected to her husband's sudden involvement in her nephew's treatment, creating a deep rift between them. "You're just giving Noah false hope," Brenda accused her husband one night, to which Richard quietly replied, "Hope is part of the treatment." 6 months later, Noah's condition was steadily improving. He wasn't completely recovered, but it was a significant turnaround from the previous terminal prognosis. Thanks to Richard's clinical trial, Noah's kidney function had begun to stabilize gradually. As Allison was having lunch in the hospital cafeteria, her smartphone rang. "Allison," it was Richard's voice. "Brenda and I have started divorce proceedings." Allison caught her breath. "Richard. I haven't thought about my own life for a long time," he said quietly. "I married Brenda because it was expected. Connections with her family were advantageous for my career." There was a moment of silence. "And knowing you and Noah reminded me of what's truly important." After that conversation, Allison received a phone call on her way back to the office. This time it was from her mother. "Allison," Carol's voice lacked its usual strength. "There's something I want to discuss." Allison went alone to meet Carol. The lounge of the luxury hotel was quiet, with Christmas decorations adding warmth to the space. However, the atmosphere between mother and daughter was colder than the warm ambience would suggest. Carol looked thinner than before, and fatigue showed in her eyes. She nervously rotated her cup with her fingers as she began the conversation. "About your father's estate," she hesitated. "I admit I concealed it from you." Allison silently stared at her mother. "Allison, I thought it was impossible for you to raise a child alone." Carol showed weakness for the first time. "I wanted you to place Noah in a specialized facility and have a decent life." "Decent?" Allison's voice was quiet but sharp. "Money and status are your definition of decent." Carol lowered her gaze. "In our world, yes. There are things more important than money, Mom," Allison said. "Noah is now participating in a clinical trial, and his condition is steadily improving. Richard has been a great help." Carol's expression changed complexly. "Richard? But Brenda?" "They're separated," Allison said quietly. "Richard seems to have found what's truly important for the first time." Carol was at a loss for words. Tears glistened in her eyes, and for the first time, an expression of acknowledging her failure as a mother appeared on her face. Christmas Eve, 1 year later. Allison's apartment was modest but wrapped in warm light. The small Christmas tree in the living room sparkled with decorations Noah had made during art therapy at the hospital. Noah's condition had stabilized, and although he still needed treatment once a week, he could attend school like a normal child and play with friends. Healthy color had returned to his once pale cheeks. The doorbell rang, and Richard entered with a bottle of wine. His divorce from Brenda had been finalized, and he was quietly rebuilding his life. Noah's attending physician, Jennifer Lee, was also invited. The 3 medical professionals were laughing as they helped with cooking in Allison's kitchen. And there was an unexpected visitor. It was Carol. She timidly offered a gift. "For Noah," she said. "Your father's heirloom watch. I thought a boy should have it." Noah carefully opened the box and stared at the old pocket watch. "Thank you, Grandma," he addressed her as such for the first time. At dinner, Noah suddenly said, "Real family is people who stay with you even in difficult times." Tears glistened in Carol's eyes. She had reduced her socializing with friends from the high society and was now facing her loneliness. She had heard that Brenda had cut off contact and was struggling to maintain her luxurious lifestyle. Richard quietly held Allison's hand, and everyone could feel a new emotion quietly growing between them. Outside the window, snow was falling silently, seemingly gently wrapping up the pain of the past. The truth that true bonds are built not only by blood relations but by choice and love was quietly filling the room.